Some stories arrive quietly. They don't announce themselves. They don't begin with a grand moment or a turning point that everyone sees coming. They begin the way mornings begin in late autumn, slowly, with gray light, with the smell of cold air and something just beginning to change. This is one of those stories. Her name was Nora. She was 17. She had grown up in a mid-sized town in the American Midwest where the streets were wide and the winters arrived early and people mostly kept to themselves in the way that people do when life is made, then cautious. Nora had not always been quiet. There was a version of her, not so long ago, who had filled rooms with energy, who had laughed easily, who had called her grandmother every Sunday without being reminded. That version of Nora had gone quiet after a series of losses arrived close together, the way losses sometimes do. Her grandmother in the spring, a close friend who moved away that summer, and something harder to name, the slow realization that she was moving through her days without anyone truly noticing. She was not invisible. People saw her, they just didn't look. And in a shelter across town, a dog was experiencing something similar. He was not young. He was not the kind of dog people stopped to exclaim over. He was a large, calm, gray-muzzled, mixed breed who had been at Millbrook Animal Shelter for 6 weeks without a single serious inquiry. The staff had named him Bear, not because he was fierce, but because of the way he moved, slow, deliberate, with a heaviness that was not sadness exactly, but the weight of a creature who had learned to carry uncertainty without complaint. Two beings, both waiting, neither knowing what for. This is the story of how they found each other, not quickly, not dramatically, but in the patient, unhurried way that real things happen. It is a story about what it means to be seen, what it means to stay, and what can grow between two living things when neither one asks the other for more than they are able to give. By the end, both of them would be home. October in Millbrook had a particular quality of light. It came in low and gold through the trees, and it made everything look like a memory. The kind of memory that is pleasant and slightly sad at the same time, the way most good memories are once enough time has passed. Nora walked home from school through that light every afternoon. It took her 22 minutes as she walked at a normal pace. She rarely walked at a normal pace. She took the longer route, past the park with the dry fountain and the row of maples that had already gone fully orange, because the longer route meant arriving home later. And arriving home later meant fewer hours sitting in a house that had recently learned to be quiet in all the wrong ways. Her mother worked until 6. Her father had moved to another city the previous spring and called on Sundays with a cheerfulness that seemed to require considerable effort from both of them. The house was clean and warm and entirely hers for 3 hours every afternoon. She should have liked it. She had told herself she liked it. But there is a difference between solitude that you choose and solitude that simply accumulates around you, the way weather does, the way dust does, the way silence does in a house where someone used to sing while cooking and no longer does. Nora's grandmother had sung while cooking. Off-key, unself-consciously, old songs from musicals that Nora didn't know the names of but could hum from memory. Her name had been Ruth. She had lived 40 minutes away, and Nora had spent more weekends there than anywhere else until last spring, when Ruth had a fall and a hospital stay, and then a second fall, and then a funeral on a gray April Tuesday that Nora still couldn't think about directly. She thought about it sideways sometimes. The way you look at something bright, not straight at it, but from the edge of your vision. She was thinking about it sideways now, walking through the October light, hands deep in the green jacket that had been her grandmother's. It was too big for her. She wore it anyway. Every day, at the park, she stopped at her usual bench. It faced the dry fountain, a concrete basin with a copper fish at the center that had long since gone green. In summer, the fountain ran. Now it just held a circle of still dark water and 2 dead leaves floating on the surface. She sat and looked at it. A woman walked past with a golden retriever on a leash. The dog swung wide toward Nora, and the woman called it back gently. Nora watched them continue down the path. The dog glanced back at her once. She stayed on the bench until the light started going flat and the air dropped a degree, the way it does in October around 4:30. Then she stood, pulled the green jacket tighter, and walked the rest of the way home. Inside, She made toast. She did homework at the kitchen table with the radio on low, not listening, just having sound. She texted back a friend from school who had sent a meme. She stared at her phone for a while without opening anything. At 5:50, she heard her mother's car in the driveway. Her mother, Linda, came in carrying grocery bags and asking about school with the particular determined brightness of a woman who understood that everything was fragile right now and had decided that warmth was the only tool she had. Nora answered in complete sentences. They made dinner together. They watched something on television that neither of them fully followed. At 9, Nora went upstairs. She sat on her bed in the green jacket and looked at the wall. On the wall was a photograph Ruth had given her. 2 dogs sleeping in a patch of sunlight, photographed from above, both curled like commas. Ruth had loved dogs her entire life. She had owned 3 over the years, always rescues, always older ones. She used to say that old dogs understood something that young dogs hadn't learned yet. Nora had asked her once what that was. Ruth had thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "That being here is enough. That you don't need a reason." Nora looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and typed, "Animal shelter near me. Volunteer." She looked at the results. Millbrook Animal Shelter had a page. It was simple, a little outdated, with photographs that looked like they had been taken on a phone several years ago. At the bottom of the page was a section titled, "Community Visits. All welcome." She read it twice. She closed the laptop. She opened it again and read it a third time. She didn't do anything else that night, but something had shifted. Just slightly, just enough. The way a door shifts when someone touches the handle from the other side without yet turning it. She didn't know it yet, but something on the other side of that door had been waiting a long time. Bear had been at Millbrook for 43 days when Nora first walked through the door. He did not know this, of course. Dogs do not count days, but they feel duration, the settling of routine into something heavier, the way the same walls begin to carry a different kind of weight when they are the only walls you have known for a long time. Bear was 10 years old. Large, mixed breed, part shepherd, possibly part something older and less definable. His coat was dark brown with a gray muzzle that had been spreading for the last 2 years. His ears were alert but relaxed. His eyes were the color of deep river water, calm and attentive and older than most people noticed, because most people did not look long enough. He had come to Millbrook from a home on the east side of town. His previous owner, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret, had developed health problems that required her to move into assisted living. Her daughter had tried for several weeks to find Bear a home through family and friends. When that did not work, she had brought him to Millbrook herself, staying for nearly an hour after the paperwork was signed, sitting on the floor with him in the visiting room. The staff had given her privacy. When she left, Bear had stood at the door of the visiting room for a while, not scratching, not whimpering, just standing. Then he had turned and walked to the blanket in the corner and lain down. That was how he handled things. Quietly, a staff member named Gloria, 50s, practical, with a warmth she expressed more through action than words, had taken to Bear in the first week. She brought him an extra blanket when the nights got cold. She sat with him during her lunch breaks, eating her sandwich and letting him rest his heavy head on her knee. She talked to him in the low, even voice she used with all the long-stay animals, not baby talk, just conversation. Updates about her day. Observations about the weather. Bear listened the way good listeners do, fully, without interrupting, his eyes on her face. He was not a difficult dog. He never had been. He was house-trained, gentle with other animals, calm around children and strangers. He did not bark excessively. He did not chew things he shouldn't. He was exactly the kind of dog that should have been easy to place. But he was 10, and large, and gray-faced. And the mathematics of adoption, for most people, started and ended there. Families with young children wanted energy and years. Older adopters often worried about their own limitations. People in between, working, busy, practical, looked at a 10-year-old large dog and saw an arriving grief rather than a present companionship. Potential adopters came through the corridor on weekends. Bear would rise when they approached, slowly, stiff in the hips, moving with the measured care of a dog who had learned that sudden movements startled people. He would come to the gate and look at them with those deep river eyes. Some would stop. Some would read his card. Bear, approx. 10 years, male, mixed breed, good with all, house-trained, calm temperament. Their faces would do something, a small rearrangement, a private calculation, and then they would move on. Bear would watch them go. Then he would return to his blanket. He did not press against the gate. He did not perform distress. He simply waited with a dignity that the staff recognized and respected, even as it made them quietly sad. In his 6th week, a young couple spent 20 minutes in the visiting room with him. They seemed warm and genuinely interested. They asked good questions. They said they would discuss it and come back. They did not come back. Gloria found out on a Wednesday and did not mention it to anyone. That evening she sat with Bear longer than usual. He put his head in her lap and she scratched behind his ear, the right one, which he preferred, and looked at the wall. Someone's coming, she told him, with more certainty than she felt. Bear's tail moved once, slow and honest. On the high window above his kennel, the rectangle of sky turned from white to pale orange to the deep blue of early evening. Bear watched it until the light was gone. Then he lay his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. Outside, the town went on. Cars and street lights and the smell of someone's dinner and the distant sound of a train passing through without stopping. Somewhere across town, a teenage girl in an oversized green jacket was opening her laptop for the 2nd time. She almost didn't go. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that makes staying inside feel like the only reasonable decision. Nora sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the shelter's web page open on her phone. She had looked at it 4 times since Tuesday. She had told no one she was planning to go. That way, if she changed her mind, it wouldn't be anything. Her mother was at the counter making oatmeal. Linda had learned over the past year to give Nora space in the mornings. She had a gift for knowing when to talk and when to simply be present. It was a quality Nora had not fully appreciated until recently. I might go somewhere this morning, Nora said. Her mother didn't turn around. Okay, that animal shelter. They have a community visiting thing. Now Linda turned. Her expression was careful, interested without being eager, because she understood that eagerness could sometimes make Nora retreat. You want company? No, I think I want to go alone. Okay. Linda turned back to the oatmeal. Take the green jacket, it's cold. She was already wearing it. The shelter was a 20-minute walk or 8-minute drive. Nora walked. She needed the time. The streets were quiet on Saturday mornings, a man raking leaves, a couple walking a small dog, a delivery truck idling outside a pharmacy. The cold air was sharp and clean. At the shelter entrance, she stopped. It was a plain building. Brown brick, small parking lot, a sign with a paw print. Nothing about it announced itself as important. Nothing suggested that what was inside would matter. She stood at the door for a moment. Then she pushed it open. Inside was warm and smelled of disinfectant and something underneath that, animal warmth, old blankets, the specific aliveness of a place where creatures lived. A woman at the front desk looked up. Her name tag said Beth. She had a practical, kind face and the unhurried manner of someone who had worked with nervous visitors before. Hi there. First visit? Yes. Nora's voice came out slightly smaller than she intended. I saw online, the community visit thing. Of course. Beth smiled. You're welcome to walk through, spend time in our visiting room with one of the dogs. No pressure, no schedule. You can just be here. She paused. Is there anything specific you're looking for, or would you just like to look around? Nora thought about it. Just look around, I think. A young volunteer named Theo offered to walk her through. He was easy company. He knew the dogs well and described each one simply and accurately without overselling any of them. He seemed to understand instinctively that she wasn't there to be persuaded, just to be present. They moved through the corridor, dogs of various sizes and ages, a beagle mix who spun in excited circles, a pair of young terriers who communicated only in volume, a gentle old hound who pressed her gray nose to the gate with patient interest. Nora looked at each one. She appreciated each one. She kept walking. Near the end of the corridor, Theo said quietly, "Last one on the left. He's been here the longest." She looked. Bear was standing near his gate. Not pressed against it, just standing a foot or so back, as if he had come to the gate to look but without any particular expectation. He was larger than she'd anticipated. His face was heavily grayed. His eyes found hers immediately and held them with a calm, direct attention that was different from the eager brightness of the younger dogs. He looked at her the way someone looks at you when they are actually paying attention. Nora stopped walking. She looked back at him. Theo stood a little to the side and said nothing. Bear did not whimper or press forward. He held his position and continued looking at her with those deep, quiet eyes. His tail moved, not the full body wag of an excited dog, but a single slow sweep once, like an acknowledgement. Nora read his card. Bear Aproxus. 10 years, male, mixed breed, good with all. House trained, calm temperament. She looked at him again. "Can I?" she started, then stopped, then tried again. "Is there a room where I could spend some time with him?" Theo smiled. "Absolutely. Let me get Gloria." She didn't know why she'd asked. She had not planned to ask. But something in the way he had looked at her, steady and unhurried and without demand, had felt like a recognition she hadn't expected to find. The visiting room was small and plain, a bench along one wall, a rubber mat on the floor, a frosted window that turned the outside world into a soft gray abstraction, a low shelf with a few toys that no one was required to use. The room had a quality of enclosure that was not uncomfortable, more like the feeling of being inside during rain. Gloria brought Bear in on a loose leash and unclipped it once he was through the door. Bear paused just inside the entrance and took in the room, the way dogs do, systematically, nose first, then eyes. He noted Nora sitting on the floor against the far wall. He noted Gloria settling onto the bench. He turned once, slowly, and then walked to the center of the mat. He stood for a moment, then he lay down. He put his chain on his paws and looked at the frosted window. Gloria had a small notebook she kept in her uniform pocket. She took it out not to write anything, just to have something to do with her hands that wasn't interfering. Nora watched Bear breathe. His sides expanded and contracted with the slow, visible rhythm of a very calm animal. His ears moved occasionally, tracking a sound from the corridor, a distant bark, the sound of the heating system clicking on, but his body stayed still, heavy and settled, like something that had decided where it was and had no particular reason to be anywhere else. She had not expected this. She had expected energy. She had expected need. The pressing, whimpering need she had seen in the other kennels. She had steeled herself for it, in a quiet way, because she wasn't sure she had anything to meet it with. But Bear was not asking for anything. He was simply there, in the same space, breathing. Something about this made her own breathing change. She hadn't noticed how shallow it had become until she felt it deepen, one longer exhale, then another. Her shoulders, which she now realized had been slightly raised, came down half an inch. She looked at his face. The gray around his muzzle was extensive, white at the chin, darker gray moving up toward the eyes, which were rimmed with the lighter coloring that came with age. He had a scar, thin and old, just above his left eye. She wondered about it in the idle, gentle way. You wonder about things that don't require answers. After 10 minutes, Gloria said softly, "He likes it when people just sit with him. He's not really a fetch dog." She said it without apology or explanation, just as a piece of information. Nora nodded. She thought about what her grandmother had said about old dogs. That being here is enough. She looked at Bear and thought, he already knows that. He's already living it. She shifted slightly, not toward him, just sideways along the wall, decreasing the distance without making it a deliberate approach. Bear's ear moved. He didn't lift his chin from his paws. He just adjusted his attention in her direction, slightly, the way a compass needle adjusts. They stayed like that for the rest of the visit. When Gloria gently indicated their time was up, Nora stood slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. She looked at Bear. He had lifted his head and was watching her stand, Can I come back? She asked Gloria. Every Saturday, Gloria said. Same as today. Just let Beth know at the front. On the walk home, the cold air felt different than it had on the walk there, less sharp, more like something she was moving through comfortably rather than against. She thought about the way Bear had looked at her when she left, had lifted, steady, watching. Not desperate, not calling her back, just watching, with that quality of complete attention that didn't require anything in return. She pulled the green jacket tighter. Her grandmother had once said that the best company is the kind that doesn't ask you to perform, that lets you simply exist without explanation. Nora had not understood exactly what she meant at the time. She thought she was beginning to understand now. At home, her mother was reading in the living room. She looked up when Nora came in. How was it? Nora took off her shoes. She hung the green jacket on its hook. She stood for a moment in the hallway, finding words for something she wasn't entirely sure how to describe. There's a dog, she said finally. He's 10. He's been there a long time. She paused. I'm going to go back next Saturday. Linda looked at her daughter for a moment. Something moved across her face. Quiet, careful, privately hopeful. I'll make sure you have a ride, she said. And that was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The Saturdays became a structure, not a rigid one, more like the structure that a river has, flowing in the same general direction each time, but finding its own shape as it moved. Nora arrived around 10 in the morning. Beth would wave her through now without paperwork. Gloria or Theo would bring Bear to the visiting room, and they would spend an hour together in the small white room with the frosted window. The visits had a rhythm. Bear would enter, survey the room, lie down in his spot, left of center, facing the window. Nora would sit on the floor, back against the wall. They would exist together without agenda. What changed week by week was distance. Not dramatically, not in a way that could be easily measured or graphed, but Nora was aware of it. That gradual closing of the space between them, first from across the room to halfway, then from halfway to close enough to hear the particular sound of his breathing, which was deep and slightly rough, the way old dogs breathe. Week 3. She brought a book. She sat close enough to read and let the sound of pages turning be part of the room's texture. Bear's ear would move when she turned a page. That was all. Week 4. She arrived, and Bear was already in the visiting room. Gloria had brought him early, some scheduling overlap, and he was lying in his spot when Nora came through the door. He lifted his head when she entered. His tail swept once across the mat. She stopped in the doorway. Something about that, the expectation, the recognition, the fact that he had been waiting and now she was here, pressed against something behind her sternum in a way she hadn't expected. She sat down, closer than before, without planning to. He put his chin back on his paws. She opened her book. They stayed that way for an hour. Outside the visiting room, the shelter moved through its Saturday business, potential adopters walking the corridor, the sounds of dogs who were young and loud and present, staff moving between tasks. Inside the small white room, time moved differently, slower, more particular. At week 5, Nora reached out and placed her hand on Bear's back. She had not planned this. Her hand simply moved, the way hands move when the body has decided something before the mind is caught up. She placed it flat on his warm flank and felt the rise and fall of his breathing beneath her palm. Bear turned his head. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He made a small sound, low, quiet, not quite a sigh. Then he settled his head back down and closed his eyes. Her hand stayed where it was. Later, walking home, she realized she had spent 40 minutes with her hand on his back and had not once thought about her grandmother. Not because she had forgotten, but because she had been, for those 40 minutes, entirely present in the moment she was in rather than in the one she had lost. She thought about this for the rest of the walk home. She thought, this is the first time that has happened in months. At week 6, she told him things, not out loud, in her head, the way you tell things to the sky, or to a journal, or to any receptive, non-judging presence. She told him about Ruth, about the green jacket, about the way her father's Sunday calls had started feeling shorter lately, and how she wasn't sure if she should mention it or just let it be what it was. She told him about a girl at school named Priya, who she had started eating lunch with, and who made her laugh about small things, and how it felt both good and slightly disloyal, as if laughing meant something was over. Bear breathed. His ear twitched. His eyes were half closed. She talked without talking, and he listened without listening. And it was exactly right. On the seventh Saturday, she arrived and Gloria was waiting for her near the front desk with an expression that Nora could not immediately read. "He had a bit of a rough week," Gloria said quietly. "Hip pain. We had the vet in on Thursday. He's okay. He's on some anti-inflammatories, but he might be slower today." Nora felt something tighten in her chest. "Can I still see him?" "Of course." Gloria touched her arm briefly. "He'll be glad you're here. He's been quieter than usual." In the visiting room, Bear was already lying down when she entered. He lifted his head when she came through the door, slower than usual, and she could see in the careful way he held himself that he was managing something. But his tail moved, that same slow, honest sweep. She didn't sit against the wall this time. She sat right beside him. She put her hand on his neck and didn't move it for the entire visit. His breathing steadied. Some things don't need to be talked about to be understood. Some comfort is simply presence, warm, consistent, and asking nothing. Bear had been offering Nora this for 7 weeks. That morning, she offered it back. The question arrived on a Sunday, not asked aloud, not asked to anyone in particular. It arrived the way important questions do, quietly, in the space between sleeping and waking, fully formed and patient, as if it had been there for some time and had simply decided that now was the moment to be noticed. What happens to Bear if no one comes? Nora lay in bed with the question for a while. The morning light came gray through her curtains. The house was quiet in the good way, the way it was quiet when her mother was home but not yet awake, when the world was still gathering itself. She had been visiting for 7 weeks. She was not naive about shelters. She had read enough online, carefully, researching in the way she approached things that mattered, to understand the realities. Long-stay animals faced increasing risk over time. 10-year-old large dogs were among the hardest to place. Some shelters had no time limits. Some did. She did not know what Millbrook's policy was. She found she was not ready to ask. Instead, she went downstairs and made coffee and sat across from her mother at the kitchen table. Linda was reading the news on her phone. She looked up. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." Nora wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She asked it plainly. "What would it take for us to adopt a dog?" Linda put her phone face down on the table. This was a gesture Nora recognized. It meant full attention was being offered. She did it rarely, and when she did, it meant something. "Tell me about it," Linda said. So Nora told her, not everything at once. Not the way she sometimes talked to Bear in the visiting room, that free interior flow. More organized, more careful, the way you talk to a person who needs real information in order to respond meaningfully. She described Bear, his age, his temperament, his hip situation, the 7 weeks she had been visiting. She described the visiting room and the way he lay in his spot and how his tail moved when she came through the door. She explained what she knew about his previous owner and why he had come to the shelter. She did not cry. She was not trying to be persuasive. She was just describing something real. When she finished, Linda was quiet for a moment. "Our lease," she said. "I need to check the pet policy. I think there's a weight limit." A pause. "I'll look today." Nora waited. "The other thing," Linda said slowly, "is that he's 10. I want you to be prepared for what that means, not to talk you out of it. Just, you know what that means. I know. You've thought about that?" "Yes." Nora looked at her coffee. Grandma used to say that knowing something ends doesn't make it not worth starting. Linda looked at her daughter for a long moment. "She did say that," she said softly. "The lease allowed dogs up to 50 pounds. Bear, according to his shelter paperwork, was 62. Linda called the landlord that afternoon and explained the situation honestly. The dog, his age, his temperament, his medical record which she had looked up online, The landlord was a practical man in his 60s who had owned dogs his entire adult life. He said he'd make an exception if Nora could provide the shelter's documentation of Bear's behavior. Linda called Millbrook and spoke to Beth. Beth listened. Then she said, "Can you bring Nora on Saturday, and yourself? I'd like both of you to spend time with him before we do paperwork. I want to make sure it's right for everyone." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say," Linda said. That week moved differently than the weeks before it, slower in some moments, faster in others. Nora went to school and ate lunch with Priya and did her homework and walked home through the October light, which had shifted now, gone from gold to something thinner and more silver as November approached. She did not tell anyone at school. It wasn't that she was superstitious. It was that the thing felt fragile still, the way new things are fragile, before they have been tested by time and difficulty and the ordinary friction of daily life. She told Bear, on the following Saturday, in the wordless way she told him things. She sat beside him with her hand on his neck and she thought, maybe you're coming home. His breathing was even and warm beneath her palm. His tail, as if he had heard, swept once across the mat. She had not expected when she walked through the shelter door that first cold Saturday to arrive at this. But some things choose you before you choose them, and the only real question is whether you are brave enough to say yes. The day Bear came home, it was raining. Not a dramatic rain, a soft, persistent November rain that turned the streets dark and made the trees look washed and clean. Linda drove. Nora sat in the back seat. They had brought a folded blanket from home, and the shelter sent Bear's own blanket, the faded green one from his kennel, in a paper bag that Gloria handed to Nora at the door without ceremony. Gloria had spent a moment with Bear before they came out. No one observed this directly, but when she walked him to the car, her eyes were bright and she cleared her throat once in the way people do when they are holding something carefully. She crouched in front of him on the wet pavement. She held his face in both hands. She looked at him. She said something quiet that only he heard. Then she stood. "Go on, Bear." Bear looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and walked to the open car door. He assessed the interior carefully, sniffing the seat, the blanket, the particular air of this specific car. Then he stepped up, turned once, and settled. Nora sat beside him. He put his gray head in her lap. She put her hand on him and looked out the rain-touched window. Linda drove slowly, taking the long route without being asked. At the house, Bear stepped out onto the wet grass of the front yard and stood still for a long time. He was doing what dogs do when they arrive somewhere new, reading the place, learning its specific language of smell and sound and light. He stood with his nose raised slightly, reading the air. The rain was very soft. It touched his coat and darkened it and ran in small channels through his gray fur. Linda stood by the car. Nora stood on the porch steps. Neither of them hurried him. After a long while, Bear lowered his head. He turned and walked toward the porch. He climbed the 2 steps carefully, right leg, then left, compensating for the hip. He stood at the front door and looked at Nora. She opened the door. He walked inside. The first hour he explored. Living room, kitchen, hallway, the small study where Linda worked from home. He moved through each space with the same measured attention, cataloging, learning, building an interior map of this new geography. He found the dog bed they had set up in the corner of the living room, circled it twice, and lay down. He exhaled. A full, deep exhale that seemed to go all the way to the floor. Nora sat on the floor near him, not touching, just near. She opened her book. She did not read it. She listened to him breathe. The rain continued outside. The heating system clicked on. The refrigerator made its familiar low hum. These were the sounds of this house, and Bear was learning them. She could see his ears moving, tracking, filing, building something. Home isn't a place you arrive at fully formed. It's a thing that builds itself slowly, from small repeated experiences. The sound of a particular door, the quality of light at 3 in the afternoon, the smell of someone's cooking, the weight of a familiar blanket. In the weeks that followed, Bear built his home out of these small materials. He learned the sound of Linda's alarm at 6:40 and would be awake and waiting by the bedroom door. He learned that Nora arrived home at 3:20 on school days and would position himself near the front window around 3:15, watching the street. He learned which step on the stairs creaked and stepped around it with careful precision, which made Nora laugh the first time she noticed it, a sudden clear laugh that surprised her with how easily it came. Linda heard that laugh from the kitchen and stood very still for a moment, holding a spatula, listening to something she had not heard in a long time. She turned back to the stove and said nothing, but she was smiling. Bear's hip required management. The vet, a calm woman named Dr. Park who spoke about older dogs with matter-of-fact tenderness, put him on a daily supplement and recommended gentle, regular movement. Sonora walked him every morning and every evening, short routes through the neighborhood, adjusting the distance based on how he moved. She learned to read his pace, when he was comfortable, when he was managing, when the cold had stiffened him and they should turn back early. She did this without complaint, without resentment, without any trace of the reluctance she might have anticipated in herself. The walks gave her something to be present for at 6:30 in the morning, which turned out to matter more than she had expected. Priya noticed the change before Nora did. "You seem different," Priya said one afternoon at lunch. "Not better or worse." She was careful that way. "Just different." "I got a dog," Nora said. "He's 10. He has hip problems, and he snores, and he takes up most of the couch." Priya looked at her. "You look like yourself again." Nora thought about this. She thought about what her self meant, whether it was the self before grief or a new self built from what remained after. She wasn't sure those were different things anymore. Maybe the self you are after loss is still you, just you rearranged, you having learned something new about where your weight rests. "I think I'm getting there," she said. On a Sunday in late November, she sat on the floor of the living room with Bear's head in her lap and called her father. The call lasted 40 minutes, longer than any call in the past year. She told him about Bear. He asked questions, real ones, the kind that meant he was listening. He laughed at the part about the creaking stair. She laughed again, too. After she hung up, she sat with the quiet for a while. Bear was breathing slowly, his eyes half closed. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and lay across them both in a long, warm stripe. She thought about Ruth. She thought about what her grandmother had said, about old dogs knowing that being here is enough, that you don't need a reason. She looked at Bear. He opened one eye. He looked at her with that deep river gaze, patient, attentive, entirely present. She put her forehead against the top of his gray head. She closed her eyes. She stayed like that for a long time. She was not in the past. She was not in the future. She was in this room, in this light, with this dog who had waited 43 days for someone to look at him long enough to see what he was. And she was in the green jacket that smelled, still, faintly of her grandmother's house, cedar and old books and something floral she could never name. And for the first time in a long time, all of those things could exist together in the same moment without any of them canceling the others out. That is what grief becomes eventually, when you give it enough time and enough gentleness. It becomes part of the light. Bear sighed. His tail swept once across the floor. Outside, November continued its quiet work, stripping the last leaves, hardening the ground, making everything lean toward winter with the patient certainty of things that know what comes next. Inside, a girl and a dog sat together in the afternoon light. Both of them had been waiting. Both of them had arrived. Some things are not chosen quickly. Some things take 43 days in a shelter, 7 Saturdays in a small white room, and 1 rainy morning in November to become what they were always going to be. And when they arrive, slowly, quietly, without announcement, they are more solid for the waiting, more real, more completely, permanently yours. This story was inspired by real shelter dogs and the real people who find them. Every week, older animals wait in shelters across the country, patient, quiet, often overlooked. They are not broken. They are simply waiting for someone to look a little longer. If this story stayed with you, maybe share it with someone who needs reminding that it's never too late to begin something good. AI-generated visuals are used in this video to illustrate the story. If you'd like to see more stories told this slowly and honestly, stories about animals, about patience, about the quiet ways we heal, a like and a share helps more people find their way here. Thank you for sitting with the story.